When a nurse from the Cherokee Nation meets a charming Southern gentleman, sparks fly.
He was a golfer, he was a pilot. He'd gone to Ohio State and played football with Woody Hayes.
But is it all smoke and mirrors?
My husband says, I'm not real sure about that guy. I was in horror. I couldn't speak. This is something that you would see on 2020. This doesn't happen to us.
Questions about his past come back to haunt Deborah Proctor.
The reason why he went missing was there was a barn fire. They never found any remains.
He would do anything for me. And I thought maybe he murdered someone.
I was afraid he would burn the place down. I was frightened at this point.
And when a cold case is reopened, Deborah's marriage goes up in flames.
It was just a nightmare.
It was like, who are you? How have you done these things? Tahlequah is the heart of the Cherokee Reservation. My father was originally sent here in the early 30s. He and his siblings were sent to boarding school. I personally have lived at 4 boarding schools, and most of my years was spent at Seneca Indian School.
Deborah does well in school and graduates from nursing college. She then goes back to work in her community.
Everybody knows Deb. She's always out in the public. Very kind, very sweet. Always out to help anybody and everybody. You know, she's a very good-hearted lady.
I'm very active in my community, and it's just a celebration of the Cherokee. It can be community activities, friendships, concerts, might be birthdays. There are the powwows, there's the parade, there's tournaments, softball, golf. We love golf. I'd been playing golf a while, for years and years.
Deborah has spent almost her entire life on the reservation, and even married and then divorced a local non-native man. In 1998, she's single with 2 sons when she decides to broaden her horizons by posting a dating profile online.
I had hoped for a long-term relationship. I wasn't looking to move, but if someone was free to move here, that was an option for me. I met a number of gentlemen, but the one that seemed the most appealing to me, his name was Jeff Walton. Jeff's profile shared of all the things he had done in his life. He was a golfer, he was a pilot, he was a project manager for large industry, construction. He'd gone to Ohio State and played football with Woody Hayes.
They exchange messages, and he tells her that he had been married and divorced once and has 1 son. When they finally talk on the phone, Deborah is charmed.
His favorite word was darling, in a New Orleans accent. I just thought that was amazing. When he began to talk about Native American music, I think I was just gone at that point. I was like, this guy really gets me.
3 months into their online relationship, Jeff tells Deborah that business is bringing him to Oklahoma. It's time to meet.
I had a big event planned. I was having my family over, and I was having dinner, and I'd fixed dessert, and, just doing a home welcome. Here's my family, welcome to Tahlequah, that kind of thing. Everyone came but Jeff.
Jeff is a no-show.
Well, I was sick at my stomach. And then he reached out in an email, and that's when he explained what all had happened. His mother had called him home to Canada. His brother John was missing. The family was worried about him, and he just had to go home. I just felt such compassion for them that he was missing.
I've known Deb a long time. She is a good judge of character. I felt cautious, but I also felt happy for Deb. She told me all about him. She showed me pictures. She was just happy as could be.
When Jeff's brother returns, with little explanation, Jeff is ready to carry on where he and Deborah left off.
He came here on April 23rd, 1998. I went to visit a medicine man, and I did have him bead a feather. Then I gave that to Jeff when I picked him up at the airport. It's a part of my culture. I was very nervous, very nervous. It's scary, because I'd been single a number of years. You know, I really loved this guy, and I'd never met him. And our first weekend together, I took him all around, introduced him to as many friends as I could, took him to my golf course. Everyone was friendly. Even my guy friends were friendly. It was beautiful. It was very lovely. My boys, they liked him. He's a very personable guy. And one of my dearest golf friends was like, well, you know, I'm not sure that you know yet, do you? And I go, oh yeah, this is the one.
He was handsome. He was kind. He had that New Orleans drawl. He treated her like a princess. In fact, he called her my Indian princess.
Katie's husband, Jesse, isn't as impressed.
We hug each other here. And they gave each other a hug.
And then Jeff does an odd thing.
Well, Jeff put Jesse in a headlock. No one was looking. And so, you know, I was just thinking, why would he do that? Well, later on, Jesse told me he hurt him because his back's jacked up. And then he said something to him like, oh, you sissy, or something.
Later, Jeff reveals another surprising side of himself that Deborah had been unaware of when he goes to dinner with Deborah and her sons.
And something came up about him being a veteran, and he told both my sons. He said, I will let you ask me one question about my being a veteran, about being in the Vietnam War. We began to learn about the prisoner of war story and the horrors of it. They were ambushed, his unit, and he was captured, and they took a gun butt and busted his feet, and he was able to finally get free and followed water back to American troops. I just thought he was a phenomenal man with all that he had done in his life. There was an annual trip that we typically made right after Christmas, and I typically would travel with all my golf couples. And so finally I was like, now I have a golf partner.
4 couples, including Jeff and Deborah, travel to Florida to play golf. But there's a small problem.
He didn't bring his golf clubs. A real golfer is not going to lose their clubs. But he said his was taken. So we bought him all new clubs. 8 of you can't play together, so we always played in different groups.
The guys play together on the first day, and Jeff stuns Deborah when he wins the tournament and a pot of money. But he's the only one happy about it.
I noticed that there was a strangeness. There was a distance, and these were my close friends. I've traveled with them for years, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And I learned that what happened, and they were just observing cheating. And they witnessed that. He might not count all of his strokes, or if he hit out of bounds, he wouldn't take his penalty shot. And if you cheat, that says a lot about you.
Deborah turns to her best friend Katie for advice.
She was crying. She was upset because they were bad-mouthing Jeff, which made me upset. They just didn't like his personality. They didn't like to be around him.
After we made that trip to Florida, that we weren't invited anymore. That was the end of our couples traveling out of state every year.
Despite this, Jeff decides to leave his home and contractor job in Kentucky to live with Deborah in Oklahoma.
He expressed that he liked it here, and we began to talk about him moving. That was the next plan that we talked about. I was just really committed. You know, we'll find work for you. I was just all in, fully committed. I just felt so warm in his presence, you know. I just felt such love in my heart for him.
3 months after they first met, Jeff arrives in Oklahoma, and Deborah rushes to the airport.
It was a little late, so he was already off the plane and out into the big common area. And his voice was kind of shaking. And so I was like, well, I guess he's really scared, you know. I would be too. He's really taken a big step, giving up everything. Of course, he's probably a little frightened, you know. But I remember his voice shaking a little bit, and he just said, you're going to marry me. You're marrying me, right? Looking back at that very moment that he came here, it's like the darkness came in the door.
I was in horror. I couldn't speak. This is something that you would see on 2020. This doesn't happen to us.
He was brilliant, you know, and evil brilliant.
Deborah Proctor's boyfriend Jeff has surprised her with an impromptu proposal.
You know, I wanted to be married, and I was very happy about it. We just wanted a small, intimate ceremony in Eureka Springs, a couple of hours from here. His son, little Jeff, and daughter-in-law came. I was so happy to meet his family, just thrilled. At the time, Dustin, my oldest son, was living in Fort Worth, Dallas, and he just said they weren't able to make it. And so that was a bit painful to my heart. My youngest son, Derek, was there, and he walked me down. It was April 23rd, 2000 we married, and that was 2 years to the date that we'd actually met in person the first time. Jeff, he had the usual smile and seemed to enjoy and engage in the day. I just went right on like I would normally go, except now I had a partner and a husband to go with me. Immediately I went to work trying to help him get work, and a friend gave him a job, and he didn't keep that longer than 3 days. He came home and he just said that really wasn't what I was looking for, and I was like, oh, well, that's disappointing, but it's okay, something will work out.
In March 2004, Jeff redeems himself when he lands his best contract yet for a construction job at a prison in North Carolina.
I was very excited about it. I was just going to give up everything. I gave notice of 2 or 3 months.
It's a big step for Deborah, who is a hospital nurse and the director of a healthcare clinic. But just before she's ready to leave, she gets a call from Jeff.
And he said that there was another contractor. He got upset with Jeff over something and kind of approached him like he was going to hit him. And Jeff said, I told him, you're picking on the wrong guy. He said he didn't stop, so I took him out. He said, I broke his teeth. He said, Deb, there's no tolerance. It doesn't matter that he attacked me. There's just no tolerance. So he lost that job. You know, this was a great job. I was moving out there. I'd already given notice. I was going to finish a different degree at Duke. I was pretty excited.
Deborah rescinds her notice, but it's hard to turn a blind eye to Jeff's violent outburst.
And at that point, I was like, I don't know. I think I'm just done. I can't. What is this work stuff? How can you mess this up? I talked to my closest friend, Katie. By this time, everyone liked Jeff. They just felt like, you know, I needed to help pack him up and move him home, that there wasn't anything he could do if he was being attacked, that he warned the guy.
I mean, we just made excuses for him. That's what honest, loving people do, I think, that can't see evil in people. Deb can't see evil in people.
But the stressful ordeal takes a physical toll on Deborah.
And when we came back, I was just deathly ill. But I'm such a I'm such a fighter and a push on, I just didn't pay attention. By the time we got home late morning, I was like, I can't breathe. You have to take me into the hospital. And of course, I was a nurse at the hospital at that time, so the crowds were gathering. You know, everyone was very concerned.
Everyone but Jeff, who goes home. Deborah is so sick with pneumonia that she's unaware he's left her side.
I ended up having to go on life support.
He was absent. He wasn't there. He never called. You know, it was an hour by hour, is she going to make it? My husband would have been right there by my bedside.
I think it was 9 days and 6 or 7 on life support. My friends were just furious that he left me. When I kind of came around, they were all still very angry that he would just walk out not knowing if I was going to live or die.
Deb bounces back quickly and forgives Jeff for his absence, but her friends think she should walk away from the relationship.
I didn't feel like I was making excuses. I felt like they just didn't understand.
Over time, most of Deborah's friends forgive Jeff, who is suitably remorseful, and he finally settles into his new life in Oklahoma.
When he did locate employment, it was typically good. He might have to travel to Arkansas or Tulsa or Bartlesville from here, but, you know, he made a good living at times.
But before long, another shoe drops.
Somehow, IRS bills arrived, and I was like, what's this about, Jeff? I didn't know you owed thousands of dollars to the IRS. You probably should have told me that. And he said, well, we're still fighting it. I was just angry. Here was this enormous tax bill that he didn't tell me he owed, but there wasn't any way around it. We had to pay it.
In January 2003, Deborah and Jeff finally receive welcome news. It's his mother Dot's 80th birthday, and they are invited to a party in Edmonton, Alberta.
He'd been in my life for 5 years, and I'd never met anybody in his family except little Jeff. So that's when we flew to Canada for the birthday party.
Jeff's Canadian family has a completely different surname, Stan, not Walton.
Jeff told me that he was born in Alaska. Sometime in grade school that they moved to Canada, and that's why his name was different. He had a different dad. But in 2003 when we went, just his mother was alive, and I met his sister Wendy. She's just got to be a great human. And then his brothers, 2 brothers, Alan and John.
Deborah is also about to meet a man named Dave Semple, a law enforcement officer who is attending the party for Dorothy Stan as well.
In 2003, my mother called and said that there was an 80th birthday party for Dot and suggested that I go up and represent the family. The birthday party was in an apartment building where his mother lived. By the time I got there and got out of my car and started walking towards the building, and I saw 2 guys walking towards me, and I saw that big toothy grin, but I recognized it right away. I said, Ronnie Stan, that's gotta be you. Well, hey, I was your closest friend back in 1947, and he recognized me then and gave me a great big bear hug. And that's when he said, I'm not Ronnie Stan, my name is Jeff Walton.
If Dave looks like he's seen a ghost, it's because the man who Dave Semple knew as Ronnie Stan died in a barn fire in 1977.
There was a bunch of pigs that were in the barn that died. The fire department and the OPP did an investigation. Everybody just assumed that he had died, and that the intense fire had just rendered everything right to dust.
Now Ronnie Stan has risen from the dead with a different name, Jeff Walton. But why is Jeff's family keeping Deborah in the dark?
Double lives are fascinating. We all wonder if we've met somebody who has some kind of secret life behind them.
I didn't want to see it. I thought he was a good guy.
3 years after marrying Jeff, Deborah Proctor finally meets his mom at her 80th birthday party in Canada.
I was so happy to meet his family, just thrilled. And we all just hit it off famously. Was happy to meet Dave, a childhood friend.
She is unaware that everyone at the party, including his family, knows Jeff by another name and are colluding to keep it from her. Jeff asks Dave not to tell Deborah, and he obliges out of loyalty.
I'd always called him Ron, and now all of a sudden to have to catch myself and call him Jeff, so I basically tried not to call him anything at all. There's a lot of questions running around in my head, but wasn't time to be asking anything at that point. I just sort of glad to see him again.
She's so delighted to meet Jeff's Canadian family. Deborah doesn't notice any awkwardness.
Had no idea. None. And they all called him Jeff.
His family. They stick together. They were just happy as heck to have him back. Made the family complete again. After talking to his mom and to his brothers and sisters on that very, very first night, I was satisfied that there was nothing that was, there was no wrongdoing. He had simply disappeared.
But the story of how Ronnie Stan became a fugitive and what crimes he may have committed while on the run is far from simple. What Jeff's friends and family know, and what Deborah won't find out for another 10 years, is that back in 1977, Ronnie Stan was married to a woman named Gail and had 2 children.
He was living in southwestern Ontario in the 1970s. He was working as a teacher at Fanshawe College. He also had a farm. So he was working on the farm at night, and by day he was teaching. He had become involved with a student. It's not good to be involved with a student at any time, but especially if you're married with children. This student told her mother that she was going to marry Ronald Stan. And her mother phoned his mother, and his mother told him, "You're in big trouble. She's from a very rich and powerful family." So on that day, his whole world was going to come apart. There just happened to be a fire which presented an opportunity. He's sitting there in the field and he can hear his wife screaming as she sees the barn burning, knowing that he was supposed to be in there feeding the pigs. He had $3,000 that was in his pocket, and under the cover of night, he hopped on a bus and crossed the border and decided to go to New Orleans.
Initially, Ron's family presumes that he died in the fire with the pigs and are unaware that he now adopts a new identity.
So Ron Stan decided to change his name to Jeff Walton. Jeff was after the son he abandoned in Ontario, and Walton was after the television show The Waltons because he thought it was a nice, friendly American family name. And in his words, he had to find someone with a little bit of money to marry, and the woman that he found was Roseanne. He described her as a beautiful young woman from a well-to-do family in New Orleans.
Jeff tells Roseanne his family died in a plane crash in Alaska. But when the two start talking marriage the following year, there's a snag.
Jeff Walton, he didn't have a birth certificate. So they went to another county where you didn't need a birth certificate to get a marriage license, and they got married there. And he was clearly still married to Gail, his Canadian wife.
He told me that he wound up getting married and having a child with her, little Jeff.
My first impression of Roseanne was she seemed like a very nice woman who had a very bad relationship with Jeff Walton. In her words, she said he could charm a snake. Roseanne got in some kind of a car accident with a commercial vehicle, and there was a lawsuit with a settlement of $500,000. Roseanne said that Jeff spent a lot of money on booze and women and partying in New Orleans.
He wound up divorcing her, and she said then he wound up marrying a Playboy bunny. And again, I figured, well, that's really, but that turned out to be true.
Jeff Walton's second wife, or Ron Stan's third wife, is Holly Kelly.
I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Playboy came into town, and I wanted to get into Playboy. I thought it was very classy, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. They ended up taking about 5,000 pictures of me, which I always wondered what in the world happened to the negatives.
Holly's living in New Orleans in the 1990s when her friends say there is someone they'd like her to meet.
Jeff was charming. We hit it off great. He had everything that you could ever imagine, you know. I mean, he had the looks, he had the charm, he had money. You know, that helps.
Holly knows her new boyfriend Jeff is still technically married, but Jeff no longer lives with Roseanne and little Jeff. What Holly doesn't know is if he has any other living relatives, including other wives.
I know that Jeff started reaching out to his family in Canada in the early 90s. I don't know if they were actively searching for him. He had been declared dead.
In 1993, Jeff divorces Roseanne and marries Holly.
It was a beautiful, beautiful wedding, beautiful day. I did want to marry Jeff beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I loved Jeff. I mean, he really was a great guy. None of us knew that he had just been lying about his entire life the whole time. I mean, we just totally fell for what he was telling us. He would do anything for me, except tell the truth. Yeah. He told my father that he was in Vietnam. I guess it was to impress my father, because my father was a Marine in World War II, Iwo Jima. You question yourself because you think, you know, am I nuts? He was very, very smart. He would cover it up somehow. Somehow he would make it believable.
And Holly did believe in Jeff until the day the phone rang and it was a call from Canada.
His brother called and said, you know, we've been looking for Jeff. And when he got home from work, hey, somebody called and said they were your family from Canada. And, you know, I mean, his face turned white as a sheet. And I thought maybe he murdered someone. What was so horrible that you would have to do this? It's just, no words.
In 1990, Jeff Walton's third wife, Holly Kelly, learns that everything he told her and her parents about his life is a lie.
I had to go tell my mother and father all of this, that this guy that they thought was Jeff Walton, his name's Ron Stan. The question is where do you take it from there? I knew at that point that it was over, and he did too.
More than 20 years later, his fourth wife, Deborah Proctor, remains ignorant of his past. But a lifetime of lies seems to be catching up with Jeff.
Jeff had had a number of hospitalizations. One was hemorrhaging, and they felt like he had bladder cancer, and I never left his side. And then he said, Deb, I'm not feeling right. My eyesight's really blurry. I'm not making sense with my words. And I took him in, and he had a stroke. So I was just trying to pay for everything.
On the verge of bankruptcy, Deborah asks Jeff to access his veterans' health benefits, but he refuses.
I said, you don't understand. We have nothing left. And that's when he informed me, I'm not going to the Veterans for Care. And besides that, I was in Special Forces. I did have a dishonorable discharge. And so they're not even going to have a list of me at the Veterans. They're not going to see me, and I'm not going anyway. And I remember at the time feeling like my throat was closing and my heart was heavy, and I thought, something's not right. It's just not right. I thought maybe I should get a private investigator. Anyway, I didn't. I do think it was about that time that I did go into what I would say is a severe depression. I was sad. I'd be somewhere in the house by myself, but just sobbing and crying and just saying, I hate my life. August 1st, 2014, I was just in my office and a phone rang, and I picked up this particular phone call. And he identified himself, his badge number, said he was in OPP, Ontario Provincial Police. He said, well, we have reason to believe that you're married to Ron Stan. We have reason to believe that he is a man that burned his place down 37 years ago and left a newborn son and a toddler and a wife. I was in so much shock, disbelief. And when we hung up, I called my friends. They said, well, for God's sake, your life's probably in danger. We have to go out to the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service, and we have to get some help. So that's what we did.
She was really confused. This man that she had been with for at least 14, 15 years was possibly not the man he'd been saying he was. I contacted Canada. I spoke to a female officer, and she said, yes. We opened up cold cases, and we came across his and started working on it again.
The officer said they found him by examining the social media pages of his various family members.
And we were shocked that we actually found him on Facebook. They explained that the reason why he went missing was there was a barn fire. And apparently he was in the barn fire, but they never found any remains. The case just kind of sat for years because they had no clue, and nothing ever surfaced again. And they asked me at that time, they said, if you don't mind, could you interview him and see what he says? We're trying to figure out if this is him or not.
Shauna drives to the medical facility where Jeff is staying while he recovers from his stroke and meets him in a private room.
I proceeded on to explain to him that I had received a call from Canada Police. So I eventually told him, I was like, do you at least have your birth certificate? Do you have your birth certificate so I can see? And he said, yes. And I said, well, where's it at? Well, I don't know. I can't remember where. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, I'll ask my dispatcher to get a copy of your birth certificate. And he looked at me. He just started grinning. He said, you got me, didn't you? And I said, you have kids and a wife in Canada? And he said, yes, I do. He was using a deceased individual's Social Security number and was getting Oklahoma benefits off the Social Security number for at least 20 years. He was a very good con. I felt so sorry for Deb once I got the confession from him.
Wasn't any getting around it. That was the truth. Just shocking. I didn't imagine anything like this. I couldn't talk to Jeff. What was I going to say? You're a liar? But, I had to plan. I mean, how am I going to tell my boys? How am I going to tell his boy?
She was very, very upset, and I could certainly understand why.
I was grateful for my friends, and we just started making plans. Well, we got to go to the bank. We got to get with your attorney. We were able to get a quick claim deed and a quick divorce, and our tribe's domestic violence program helped me. They helped serve the papers because I just couldn't do it.
Jeff Jr. agrees to take custody of his father.
I was just really angry. I was frightened at this point that, he might hurt us. Because now I'd learned he burned the place down.
It was just a nightmare, and you feel so stupid. The time I spent with him was not quality time, it was all fake time. I just hated him.
I'm at home alone in my bedroom when I got the call that they had left Tahlequah and they were on the road. People talk about spiritual awakenings or a burning bush moment or something. For me, it was absolutely that moment. And I realized I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. And then I thought, dear God, if you can just get me up on my feet, I will not only survive, but I will always remember to help others. It was just a profound understanding of what I'd been through and what I had yet to do.
I think it was a couple of days after that I had a conversation with Jeff. I think he was kind of somewhat relieved about the whole thing, coming out in the open after all these years.
An Ontario man who went missing in the 70s and was declared dead in the 80s has been found in the United States alive. Police say the 69-year-old has been living in Oklahoma under a different name.
Once it came out, it just snowballed.
Deborah is about to learn the full extent of Jeff's lies, and it makes her ordeal even more unbearable.
And that's when I learned about all the wives.
For 37 years, Ronald Stan has been living under a fake identity in the U.S. In 2014, the Ontario police issue a press release about the case.
This story landed on my desk, and it said a man named Ronald Stan, who was missing in 1977, has been found alive and well in the United States, which was a crazy story. Like, what happened there?
Tim Alamenchuk finds Jeff in New Orleans, where he is now living with his son Jeff Jr., and he agrees to an interview.
He had this kind of unmistakable charm that I could see disarming somebody. Every successive wife would eventually find out about his past, and his stories would just fall apart and wouldn't quite hang together. But he had this capacity to charm people off the hop and to get people to kind of not dig deeper into his history.
He just was a pathological liar. Only a narcissist person could do something like that, to make people think you're dead and to leave your children and never call them.
I don't think he was actually a very good liar, and that's evidenced by how his story fell apart along the way. And when you look into it and when you talk to people, his family knew that he was alive. His brother had contact with him on Facebook.
Even his Canadian wife, Gail, eventually found out about his lies in 1998 when he shows up at his dad's funeral.
He said that his wife was at the funeral and that she wouldn't even look at him. As far as I know, he never spoke with Gail again.
Ron had been declared legally dead in 1986, and Gail had received an insurance payout.
He explained to me later on that insurance money that his first wife had got. Once he contacted her, she was quite PO'd about the whole thing and paid the money back to the insurance company. So there's no fraud or anything there.
His father's funeral may have been a time when he realized that he can't undo what he did in 1977. And so in reaction to that, that might have been what spurred looking for another new life.
Deborah never talks to Jeff again.
I was sitting in one of the airports and I saw that he was calling, and it just went to voicemail. And he said that he had forgiven me for everything I'd done to him. And at this point, I was just done. I just could hardly even react. I just couldn't stand him.
Months later, Deborah speaks to his old friend Dave Semple, who explains why he never told her the truth.
He just explained that we had a good life, we seemed happy, and they just did not feel like it was their place to fly in here and tell me everything and destroy my life. I myself submitted letters to HHS, fraud, abuse. I think I wrote 3 different divisions of Medicare and Social Security and let them know who Jeff really was. And as far as I know, nobody ever pursued it.
Jeff never faces criminal charges for arson, identity theft, bigamy, or any of his misadventures. But his life goes downhill after his divorce from Deborah.
I don't know what happened there, but he wound up, I think, living almost a homeless life for a while. And then the next I heard from little Jeff, that I think it was 2019, that his dad had just passed away.
Jeff may have left behind a trail of damaged lives, but Deborah transcended his betrayal, although it took her some time.
I just went through a lot of periods of just being furious, angry, turn it on myself sometimes, how could you? And then resentful at all the best years of my life I spent with him. The job that I've moved into, it is the focus entirely, is domestic abuse, family abuse, particularly women, but families. I'm a director of a program that's our total focus. And I feel like it's fulfilling a commitment I made right after this happened, that I would always help others in this situation. Because we can go on to not only survive, we can live. And I feel like I live. Not just a survivor, I live. That's what I would want for others. We're warrior women. We're very strong.
The desert outside Phoenix keeps secrets well. Wind drags sand across empty roads, erasing tracks almost as quickly as they appear. In the summer of 2003, under a sky that never seemed to end, one of those secrets began with a single unanswered phone call, the kind of small, ordinary moment that no one realizes will become the beginning of a cold case. It was a Tuesday evening, the air still holding the heat of the day like a furnace that refused to cool. In a quiet suburban neighborhood in Arizona, porch lights flickered on one by one as families settled into their routines. Dogs barked behind wooden fences. A television murmured through an open window. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt dangerous. But inside a small beige house at the end of a cul-de-sac, something had already gone wrong. 27-year-old Emily Carter had planned to meet a friend that night. It was supposed to be simple: dinner, a late conversation, maybe a quick stop for coffee before heading home. Emily was the kind of person whose life moved on predictable rails. She worked at a dental clinic, volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends, and called her mother almost every night. Reliable, organized, the kind of person who left notes on the refrigerator and remembered birthdays without reminders. And yet that night, Emily never arrived. At first, no one panicked. People miss dinners all the time. Phones die. Traffic stretches longer than expected. But as the hours passed, the silence grew heavier. Her friend tried calling again. No answer. A voicemail. Another message. Still nothing. By midnight, the worry had begun to spread. The next morning, the police received a missing person report. At first glance, it looked routine. An adult woman. No signs of struggle reported. No history of running away. Detectives filed the paperwork, opened a case file, and began asking the first quiet questions that always follow a disappearance. Where was she last seen? Who spoke to her last? And why had no one heard from her since? Emily's car was discovered later that afternoon in the parking lot of a small strip mall less than 3 miles from her home. The vehicle sat alone beneath the relentless Arizona sun, dust already collecting on the windshield. It was locked. The purse was inside. Her phone was gone. At first glance, nothing looked disturbed, but investigators quickly noticed something that made the atmosphere shift. The driver's seat had been pushed back, farther than Emily normally kept it, and the passenger door had been left slightly ajar. That detail might have meant nothing, or it might have meant everything. Police sealed off the vehicle. Crime scene technicians worked carefully, dusting surfaces for prints, photographing every inch of the interior. The strip mall itself was quiet, almost eerily empty in the early afternoon heat. A grocery store, a dry cleaner, a small cafe that had closed hours earlier. Witnesses were difficult to find. Still, detectives knocked on doors. They spoke with employees. A cashier remembered seeing Emily earlier that evening, around 6:30 p.m., walking toward the parking lot with a small bag of groceries. She had seemed normal, relaxed, smiling. Then came the detail that would linger in the case file for years. Someone had been waiting near her car. The witness couldn't describe the person clearly, just a vague impression of a man standing near the vehicles, leaning casually against a truck as if waiting for someone. Nothing about it had seemed suspicious at the time. But now the memory carried weight. Investigators began building a timeline. Emily left work at 5:40 p.m. Stopped at the grocery store around 6:20. Seen leaving at approximately 6:30. After that, nothing. Her phone stopped sending signals shortly after she left the parking lot. No calls. No texts. Just silence. By the second day, the case had escalated. Search teams combed the desert edges outside the city. Volunteers walked dry washes and hiking trails. Helicopters circled overhead. Posters appeared on telephone poles and gas station windows. The community watched with growing anxiety. Local news stations picked up the story. Young woman missing. Last seen in Phoenix. Family pleading for information. Emily's parents arrived from out of state almost immediately. They stood in front of cameras with red eyes and trembling voices, asking anyone with knowledge to come forward. Emily doesn't just disappear, her mother said. Something happened to our daughter. Behind the scenes, detectives quietly began examining Emily's personal life. Friends, co-workers, neighbors. They searched for anything that might explain the disappearance: conflict, jealousy, hidden relationships, financial stress. But Emily's life appeared ordinary. Painfully ordinary. No criminal history. No known enemies. No sudden changes in behavior. Still, one name kept appearing in conversations. A family friend. Michael Harper. Michael had known Emily since she was a teenager. He had been close to her parents, attending barbecues and holiday gatherings over the years. In photographs from earlier times, he appeared smiling beside the family, arms slung casually over shoulders, the image of someone trusted. At first, investigators treated him like any other acquaintance. Routine questions. Routine statements. Michael told detectives he hadn't seen Emily that day. In fact, he said it had been weeks since they last spoke. His tone was calm, cooperative. Nothing about the interview raised immediate alarms. And yet one small detail caught the attention of a detective reviewing phone records. A call. Just one. Placed from Michael's phone to Emily's number the evening she disappeared. The timestamp read 6:12 p.m. Only minutes before she arrived at the grocery store. Detectives contacted Michael again. He explained it quickly, casually. He had called to ask about helping Emily's father with a small repair job. When she didn't answer, he assumed she was busy and forgot about it. On the surface, it sounded harmless. Still, the call placed him closer to the timeline than he initially claimed. Investigators made a note in the case file. Then another strange piece surfaced. Security cameras from a nearby gas station captured a dark pickup truck leaving the strip mall parking lot around 6:35 p.m., just minutes after Emily had been seen walking to her car. The footage was grainy, barely usable, but the vehicle looked similar to one registered to Michael Harper. Detectives approached him again. This time, the questions were more pointed. Michael insisted he had been driving through the area earlier that evening, but claimed he never stopped. He said he had errands to run and happened to pass the strip mall on his way home. His explanation wasn't impossible, but something about the timing bothered investigators. Still, without stronger evidence, there was little they could do. Days passed. Then weeks. Search teams found nothing. No trace of Emily. No body. No definitive sign of a struggle. The case slowly cooled. Media coverage faded. Volunteers returned to their normal routines. The desert remained silent. For detectives, the investigation drifted into a familiar and frustrating territory, the place where clues exist but answers do not. Phone records suggested contact. Witnesses hinted at a man in the parking lot. A vehicle might have been nearby, but none of it could prove a crime. Months turned into years. Emily's photograph stayed pinned to a bulletin board inside the police department. Detectives changed assignments. Case files moved from active desks to metal cabinets filled with unresolved mysteries. The label on the folder eventually gained a new classification: cold case. For Emily's family, time did not bring peace. Birthdays passed. Holidays arrived with an empty seat at the table. Her mother continued calling the detective unit every few months, hoping for news that never seemed to come. And somewhere in Arizona, life continued for everyone connected to the investigation, including Michael Harper. He remained part of the community, worked steady jobs, attended local events. To anyone watching from the outside, he looked like an ordinary man living an ordinary life. The years moved forward relentlessly. Technology changed. Investigative techniques improved. DNA databases expanded. Old evidence boxes collected dust on shelves while new cases demanded attention. But cold cases have a strange habit of waiting. Waiting for the one detail someone missed. Waiting for technology to catch up with the truth. Waiting for time itself to loosen the grip of secrets. Nearly 2 decades after Emily Carter vanished beneath the Arizona sun, detectives would reopen that dusty file. They would re-examine every photograph, every phone record, every statement. And when they did, one familiar name would rise again from the pages of the past. A family friend. A phone call at 6:12 p.m. A pickup truck leaving a parking lot. And a question that had haunted the investigation since the very first night. The file had not been opened in years. Dust clung to the edges of the cardboard box as Detective Aaron Delgado slid it across the metal table inside the Phoenix Police Department's cold case unit. The label had faded slightly, but the words were still clear enough to sting. Emily Carter, missing person, 2003. 17 years had passed since the night she vanished. 17 years of unanswered questions. 17 years of silence from the desert. Delgado had seen dozens of cold cases before. Boxes filled with old photographs, brittle paper reports, and evidence bags that smelled faintly of time itself. Some files were thin, the kind that never had a real chance. Others were thick with theories that collapsed under scrutiny. Emily Carter's file sat somewhere in between. Not empty, but not solved. He opened the box slowly, flipping past the original police reports. Grainy photographs of the strip mall parking lot. Evidence logs. Interview transcripts from 2003, typed on aging printers and signed by detectives who had long since retired. The first thing Delgado noticed was the timeline. 6:12 p.m. Phone call from Michael Harper to Emily Carter. 6:20 p.m. Emily enters grocery store. 6:30 p.m. Witness sees her walking toward her car. 6:35 p.m. Dark pickup truck captured leaving parking lot. After that, the timeline dissolved into nothing. No confirmed sightings. No phone activity. No body. Cold cases often died in that empty space, the moment where the trail vanished. But something about this one lingered. Delgado leaned back in his chair and studied the photograph clipped to the inside of the file folder. Emily Carter stared back with an easy smile, sunlight in her hair, unaware that her image would spend decades taped to evidence boards and investigation files. 17 years. A lifetime for some people. But in cold case work, time sometimes became an advantage. Technology had changed dramatically since 2003. Digital mapping, advanced DNA analysis, cellular tower reconstruction. What investigators could not prove in the early 2000s sometimes became obvious under modern tools. Delgado called in another detective from the unit, Maria Alvarez. She had a reputation for patience, the kind of investigator who could stare at a case file for hours without missing the smallest inconsistency. They began rebuilding the investigation from the beginning, not trusting the old conclusions, not assuming anything. Every statement was reread, every timeline checked, Every witness re-examined through the lens of time. One of the first names they encountered again was familiar. Michael Harper, family friend, the man who had known Emily since she was a teenager. Alvarez flipped through the transcripts of his interviews from 2003. His statements were calm, almost rehearsed, cooperative without revealing much. A man who seemed slightly uncomfortable with police attention but never defensive. At the time, detectives had noted nothing that justified further action. But cold cases had a way of changing perspective. "Look at this," Alvarez said quietly, pointing to a line in the transcript. Harper had told investigators he hadn't seen Emily for weeks before her disappearance. But the phone records clearly showed the call at 6:12 p.m. That contradiction had been noticed back then, but his explanation, a casual call about helping her father with a repair, had satisfied investigators. At least enough to move on. Delgado frowned. "Did they verify the repair job?" he asked. Alvarez flipped through another report. No follow-up. The detail hung in the air. 17 years earlier, detectives had been juggling multiple leads. Missing persons cases move quickly at first, and investigators often chase the most urgent clues. Some questions never get revisited once the trail grows cold. Delgado made a note. Verify Harper's explanation. But something else caught Alvarez's attention: the truck. The gas station security camera footage had captured a dark pickup truck leaving the parking lot minutes after Emily was last seen. The footage had been too grainy for a clear identification. Still, investigators had noted it resembled Harper's vehicle. Back in 2003, the image resolution had been too poor to confirm anything. But now, technology had changed. Modern enhancement software could sometimes pull details from footage once considered useless. Delgado requested the original tape from evidence storage. 2 days later, a technician carefully transferred the footage into a digital format. The video flickered across a large monitor inside the department's forensic lab. Time-stamped frames from a camera that had watched silently for decades. The pickup truck appeared again at 6:35 p.m., rolling slowly out of the strip mall parking lot. Dark color, extended cab, dust on the sides. Nothing extraordinary, but the enhancement process began isolating shapes. Edges sharpened slightly. Reflections became clearer. The license plate was still unreadable. Yet another detail emerged. A dent, small but visible, on the rear passenger side panel. Delgado felt a quiet tension settle into the room. Vehicle records from 2003 showed that Michael Harper owned a dark Ford pickup truck. And, according to insurance documents, that truck had once been reported with minor body damage, a dent on the passenger side panel. It wasn't proof, but it was something investigators 17 years earlier had never been able to confirm visually. The detectives exchanged a look. Cold cases rarely produced sudden breakthroughs. They moved slowly, piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But sometimes the edges began to line up. The next step was obvious. Find Michael Harper. By now, he was older, in his late 50s. Records showed he still lived in Arizona, though not in Phoenix anymore. A small town nearly 2 hours away, closer to open desert than suburban neighborhoods. His life appeared quiet. Steady employment history. No serious criminal record. No major incidents that would have drawn attention. For 17 years, the name Michael Harper had faded from the investigation. Until now. Delgado and Alvarez drove out to the town 2 days later. The landscape changed gradually as Phoenix disappeared behind them. Buildings thinned. Gas stations became sparse. The horizon widened into miles of desert broken only by dry brush and the occasional roadside diner. Harper's house sat at the end of a gravel road. A modest single-story structure with a small garage and a weathered pickup truck parked beside it. Dark color. Extended cab. The detectives stopped their vehicle and watched for a moment. Some cold case interviews felt routine. Others carried a quiet electricity, the sense that the past was about to be disturbed. Michael Harper stepped outside after a few minutes, wiping his hands with a rag as if he had been working in the garage. He noticed the police car immediately. For a brief second, something passed across his face. Not panic, but recognition. Almost like he had been expecting this day. Delgado approached first. "Mr. Harper?" The man nodded slowly. "That's me. We're with Phoenix Police. We're reviewing the Emily Carter case." The name hung in the air. 17 years compressed into a single moment. Harper looked toward the desert horizon before speaking again. "Emily," he repeated quietly. "I remember." Delgado watched carefully. Some suspects reacted with anger when cold cases resurfaced. Others showed surprise. Harper showed neither. Just a strange calm. "We'd like to ask you a few questions," Alvarez said. Harper shrugged lightly. "I figured that might happen someday." The words lingered longer than expected. Inside the house, the interview began. The walls were decorated sparsely. Old photographs, fishing gear, a television playing quietly in the corner. Harper sat across from the detectives at a wooden table, arms folded loosely. Delgado started with simple questions. Where had Harper been living in 2003? Did he remember the night Emily disappeared? Had he spoken to her that evening? Harper's answers came slowly, but consistently. "Yes, I called her. Yes, I drove through the shopping center area that evening." But he maintained the same explanation he had given in 2003. He never saw her, never approached her, never left his truck. Just driving through. Just a coincidence. 17 years later, the story hadn't changed. But detectives had learned something important during cold case work. Stories that remain exactly the same after decades sometimes mean the person telling them has rehearsed them for years. Alvarez asked another question. "Do you still own the same pickup truck?" Harper hesitated for the first time. "More or less," he said. "Upgraded parts over the years." Delgado glanced toward the window where the truck sat outside in the gravel driveway. Dark paint, extended cab, and from this distance, barely visible in the sunlight, a small dent on the rear passenger side panel. The same place the enhanced footage suggested damage back in 2003. Still not proof. Still not enough. But cold cases move differently than fresh investigations. They rely on pressure, time, and sometimes the quiet realization that the past is finally catching up. As the interview continued, Harper remained calm. But one small moment did not go unnoticed. When Alvarez casually mentioned the grocery store parking lot again, the place where Emily Carter was last seen alive, Harper's fingers tightened briefly around the edge of the table. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. Then the calm returned. The desert wind outside pushed dust across the gravel driveway. The same desert that had swallowed countless secrets over the years. And somewhere within those miles of silent land, investigators believed one of those secrets still waited. The question was no longer whether Emily Carter's disappearance had been a crime. The real question had become something far more unsettling. Had the man sitting calmly across the table from them been carrying that secret for nearly 2 decades? The interview ended without an arrest. Cold case investigators had learned long ago that patience was often more powerful than confrontation. 17 years of silence could not be broken in a single afternoon. Not yet. Michael Harper walked the detectives to the door with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the conversation. The desert air outside carried the dry smell of dust and sun-baked earth. Nothing about the quiet property suggested violence. Nothing hinted at a secret buried somewhere in the past. But as Delgado and Alvarez stepped back toward their car, both detectives glanced again at the pickup truck parked in the gravel driveway. Dark paint, extended cab, and the dent. Small, shallow, barely noticeable unless someone was looking for it. The metal around it had been repainted years earlier, but the shape remained. Time had softened it, but it had not disappeared. Inside the vehicle, the fabric seats looked worn but clean. The truck was clearly still in use. Delgado stopped for a moment beside it. "Mind if we take a look?" he asked casually. Harper shrugged. "Go ahead." Permission changed everything. No warrant needed. No legal complications. Just a quiet inspection in the Arizona sunlight. The detectives moved slowly around the truck, studying every angle. Alvarez crouched near the rear passenger panel, tracing the outline of the dent with her eyes. It matched the enhancement from the gas station footage almost perfectly. Again, not proof. But the coincidence was becoming uncomfortable. Delgado opened the truck door and leaned inside. The interior smelled faintly of motor oil and desert dust. A few tools sat behind the seats. Nothing unusual. Nothing immediately suspicious. Still, something about the moment felt heavy. Cold cases rarely produced dramatic revelations out in the open. Instead, they stacked small details on top of one another until the weight became impossible to ignore. Delgado stepped back. "Thanks for your time," he told Harper. The man nodded. "No problem." But as the detectives climbed back into their vehicle, Alvarez noticed something in the rearview mirror. Harper had not gone back inside. He stood beside his truck, watching them drive away. Watching carefully. Back in Phoenix, the case began moving faster. Delgado requested a deeper analysis of everything connected to Michael Harper in 2003. Financial records, employment history, phone logs, vehicle registrations. Old details that might have seemed irrelevant years ago now became potential puzzle pieces. The first discovery came from an unexpected place: land records. In 2004, roughly a year after Emily Carter disappeared, Harper had purchased a small plot of land outside Phoenix. Remote. Barely developed. 30 acres of desert located miles away from the nearest paved road. At the time, the purchase had raised no suspicion. Many people in Arizona bought rural property for recreational use, hunting, or future development. But cold case investigators looked at land differently. Open desert meant space. Space meant privacy. And privacy meant opportunity. Delgado leaned back in his chair, staring at the satellite map on his computer screen. The property sat roughly 40 miles from the grocery store where Emily had last been seen. Far enough away to avoid attention. Close enough for a late-night drive. Alvarez tapped the screen. "When did he sell it?" she asked. Delgado checked the records again. He didn't. The land still belonged to him. That discovery changed the atmosphere inside the cold case unit. 17 years earlier, investigators had searched countless areas around Phoenix. Volunteers had walked desert trails and dry riverbeds. Helicopters had scanned open terrain. But 30 acres of privately owned desert had never been examined. Not once. Delgado requested a search warrant. Judges were often cautious with cold case requests, especially when no body had ever been found. But the timeline inconsistencies, the truck footage, the phone call, and the land ownership created enough suspicion to justify a closer look. The warrant was approved within 48 hours. 3 days later, the search team assembled before sunrise. Crime scene technicians, forensic anthropologists, ground-penetrating radar specialists. A quiet convoy of law enforcement vehicles moved slowly through the empty desert roads as the sky began turning pale orange along the horizon. The property itself was exactly what the satellite images suggested. Empty. Silent. Miles of dry earth broken only by patches of scrub and scattered rocks. Harper had never built anything there. No structures. No fences. Just land. Which made the situation even more unsettling. The team began by marking a grid across the property. Methodical searches were essential in terrain this large. Ground-penetrating radar equipment rolled slowly across the desert floor, scanning for disturbances beneath the surface. For hours, nothing appeared. Just layers of dry soil hardened by years of heat. But around midday, one of the technicians raised a hand. "Got something." The radar display showed a faint irregularity beneath the ground, roughly 4 feet below the surface. It wasn't large, but it was different from the surrounding soil. Disturbed earth. Possibly a hole that had been filled long ago. The team paused. No one spoke for a moment. Delgado felt the quiet tension that only cold case investigators truly understood, the moment where a mystery might finally begin to reveal itself. A small excavation began. Shovels first, then careful hand tools. The desert soil was stubborn, packed tightly by nearly 2 decades of heat and wind. But slowly, inch by inch, the ground began to open. Dust drifted upward as the hole deepened. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3. Then the shovel stopped. Metal had struck something hard. The forensic technician knelt down and brushed away the loose dirt with a gloved hand. A fragment of fabric appeared first. Dark. Faded by time. Everyone leaned closer. More dirt was cleared away. The shape beneath the soil slowly emerged. Not large. Not a full body. Just a piece of something that had once been buried deliberately. The technicians worked with careful precision now, removing dirt with brushes instead of shovels. And then the object became unmistakable. A shoe. Women's size. Weathered but still recognizable. The leather had cracked over the years, but the style matched a photograph from the original evidence file. The same brand Emily Carter had been wearing the night she disappeared. Silence settled across the excavation site. The desert wind whispered through the dry brush. Delgado felt the weight of 17 years pressing down on the moment. This was the first real trace of Emily Carter anyone had seen since 2003. But as the excavation continued, another unsettling detail became clear. The shoe was alone. No skeleton. No body. Just the shoe. Buried deliberately in the middle of an empty desert property owned by Michael Harper. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Because finding a single personal item sometimes meant something far worse than finding a body. It meant the truth had been hidden carefully, and the person who buried it had likely returned later. To move the rest. The search continued across the property for the rest of the day. More radar scans. More excavation points. But nothing else appeared beneath the desert floor. Just miles of silence. And one lonely shoe that had waited 17 years to be discovered. Back in Phoenix, the evidence bag containing the shoe sat under bright laboratory lights. Forensic specialists photographed every detail. Traces of soil. Fragments of fibers. Even the smallest particles were collected for testing. And inside the shoe's cracked lining, investigators discovered something that made the entire cold case shift once again. A strand of hair. Long. Dark. And preserved just well enough for modern DNA testing. 17 years earlier, this evidence would have meant nothing. But now, technology had advanced. And if the hair belonged to Emily Carter, or someone connected to her disappearance, the truth that had slept beneath the desert might finally be waking up. The quiet Arizona cold case was no longer just a missing person mystery. It was becoming something else entirely. A buried secret. A family friend. And a piece of evidence that had waited nearly 2 decades for someone to find it. The shoe sat inside a sealed evidence bag beneath the harsh, white lights of the Phoenix Police Forensic Lab. For 17 years it had rested beneath layers of desert soil, silent and forgotten, buried in land that few people had ever walked across. Now it lay on a stainless steel table surrounded by technicians in gloves and masks, every movement slow, deliberate, careful. Cold cases rarely offered moments like this. For investigators who spent years staring at unanswered questions, even the smallest physical clue felt like a door cracking open after decades of darkness. Detective Delgado stood behind the observation glass with Alvarez, watching as the forensic team worked. The shoe looked fragile. The leather had stiffened and cracked after years underground, and the fabric lining had faded almost to gray. Yet the shape was unmistakable. The same style Emily Carter had been wearing the night she disappeared, confirmed by photographs taken earlier that evening when a grocery store security camera had briefly captured her walking toward the parking lot. But the most important discovery wasn't the shoe itself. It was the strand of hair found inside. A single dark strand caught in the stitching of the lining. Nearly invisible unless someone examined the shoe under magnification. 17 years ago, such a small fragment might have been dismissed as contamination or simple debris. But modern forensic science had changed the rules. DNA technology had become far more sensitive. Now, even a single hair root could reveal a genetic identity. The technician carefully removed the strand using tweezers, placing it into a sterile collection tube before sealing it. Delgado exhaled slowly. That hair might be the first voice Emily Carter has had in 17 years, he murmured. But even as the testing began, the cold case unit continued digging into Michael Harper's past. Because the discovery of the shoe had shifted the investigation into new territory. Before, Harper had simply been a person of interest, someone connected loosely to the timeline. Now the evidence placed Emily Carter directly on land he owned. Buried. Hidden. And that changed everything. Detectives began reconstructing Harper's movements during the summer of 2003 with new urgency. Old records were pulled again. Gas receipts. Credit card statements. Phone logs that had once seemed too vague to mean anything. One detail quickly caught Alvarez's attention. 2 days after Emily disappeared, Harper's phone had connected to a cellular tower near the desert property where the shoe had been discovered. At the time, that data had not raised suspicion. Cell tower records in 2003 were crude and imprecise, often covering large geographic areas. But combined with the newly discovered evidence, the location felt far less like coincidence. It suggested something chilling. Harper might have returned to the property after Emily vanished. Possibly in the middle of the night. Possibly alone. But investigators still needed more. They needed something stronger than suspicion. Something that could survive a courtroom. The DNA results arrived 10 days later. The forensic supervisor called Delgado directly. "You'll want to come down here." The tone of his voice carried weight. Inside the lab, the sealed report lay on the table between them. Delgado opened it slowly. The hair belonged to Emily Carter. Confirmed. There was no longer any doubt that the shoe buried on Harper's desert land had once been on her foot. The cold case had finally crossed the invisible line investigators waited for. Emily Carter was no longer just missing. She was the victim of a crime. But the discovery raised an even darker question. Why was only the shoe buried there? If Emily had been killed and buried on the property, the rest of the remains should have been nearby. Even after 17 years, some trace would likely remain. Bones, clothing fragments, personal items. Yet the desert search had uncovered nothing else. Which meant one of two things. Either the body had never been buried there, or someone had moved it. Delgado leaned over the map again, studying the 30-acre grid the search teams had combed. "People rarely bury something once," he said quietly. Alvarez understood immediately. If Harper had buried Emily's belongings on the property, he might have returned later. To relocate the body. To erase the evidence. And if that had happened, the timeline of the crime might stretch far beyond the night she vanished. The next step in the investigation was inevitable. Michael Harper had to be brought back in. This time, the conversation would be very different. 2 days later, Harper sat once again inside an interview room at the Phoenix Police Department. The room was plain, gray walls, metal table, a small recording camera mounted in the corner. The same sterile environment where countless suspects had watched their stories unravel. Harper looked older than he had just weeks earlier when detectives first visited his home. Not dramatically, but enough to suggest the weight of the past had begun pressing down on him. Delgado placed the evidence photograph on the table. The shoe. Still half covered in desert soil. Harper stared at it without speaking. "We found this on your property," Delgado said calmly. Silence stretched across the room. For a moment, Harper's expression remained unreadable. Then his eyes moved slowly toward the detectives. "I've owned that land a long time," he said quietly. "People dump things in the desert." The explanation sounded thin, even as he spoke it. Delgado slid the lab report beside the photograph. "The DNA inside the shoe belongs to Emily Carter." That statement landed differently. Harper's jaw tightened slightly, but he still said nothing. Alvarez leaned forward. "Emily Carter disappeared after leaving a grocery store parking lot," she said. "Your truck was seen leaving that same parking lot minutes later." Harper remained silent. 2 days later, Delgado continued, "Your phone connects to a tower near your desert property." Still nothing. The air inside the room felt heavier now. Cold case interrogations were strange things. The suspect had lived with the secret for years, sometimes decades. Their story had been practiced so many times that it felt permanent. Breaking that story required patience and pressure. Delgado placed another photograph on the table. The enhanced image of the pickup truck from the gas station camera. The dent clearly visible now. We also know the truck in this image has the same damage as yours. Harper stared at the photograph. Seconds passed. Then something changed. Not a confession. Not even a clear reaction. Just a small shift in his posture. The first real sign that the walls around his story might be beginning to crack. He leaned back in his chair slowly. 17 years, he said quietly. The detectives exchanged a glance. Harper looked at the photographs again, then at the detectives. And for the first time since the investigation reopened, his voice carried something new. Fatigue.
People move on, he said.
Delgado didn't respond. Because sometimes silence forced suspects to keep talking. Harper rubbed his hands together slowly. You dig up a shoe after 17 years, he continued. And suddenly, everything comes back. His eyes drifted toward the wall for a moment. Then he looked back at them. But instead of explaining anything, Harper said something far more unsettling. You're looking in the wrong place. The room went still. Alvarez spoke first. What does that mean? Harper exhaled slowly. Then he leaned forward again, studying the photograph of the shoe. And with a calm voice that sent a chill through the room, he added, You should have kept searching. The words hung there like a shadow. Because in cold case investigations, statements like that could mean many things. A bluff, a distraction, or a quiet admission that somewhere out in the endless Arizona desert, another piece of Emily Carter's story was still waiting to be found. The words lingered in the interview room long after Michael Harper stopped speaking. You should have kept searching. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt tight, like the quiet seconds before a storm breaks. Detective Delgado studied Harper carefully, watching every small movement in his face, every twitch of his fingers resting on the table. Cold case interrogations were rarely loud or dramatic. They moved slowly, like pressure building beneath the surface of the earth. And sometimes the most revealing moment came not from a confession, but from a single sentence that slipped out too easily. Alvarez leaned forward slightly. What exactly should we have kept searching for? She asked. Harper didn't answer right away. His eyes returned to the photograph of the shoe buried in desert soil. The image seemed to hold his attention longer than expected. Then he looked back up. You people think you know how the desert works, he said quietly. Delgado said nothing. You dig a hole. You find something. You think that's the whole story. Harper tapped one finger, lightly on the table. But the desert moves. The sentence sounded strange, almost philosophical. But for investigators who had spent time searching Arizona's remote land, the meaning was clear. Wind shifts sand. Flash floods reshape dry washes. Animals disturb buried ground. A location that looked untouched could hide layers of older disturbances beneath it. Delgado spoke carefully. Are you saying there's more out there? Harper gave a small shrug. I'm saying you stopped looking too soon. Then he leaned back again, folding his arms. The calm returned to his face, as if nothing unusual had been said. The interview ended not long afterward. Harper asked for a lawyer. That simple request slammed the brakes on the conversation. Legally, the detectives could go no further. But as Delgado and Alvarez left the room, both understood the situation had shifted again. Harper hadn't confessed, but he had confirmed something important. The desert property mattered. And if his words held any truth, investigators had only scratched the surface. Within hours, the cold case unit began planning a second search. This time, it would be larger, more precise, more aggressive. The original grid search had covered the property methodically, but technology had improved even in the short time since that operation. Investigators now brought in additional tools: deeper ground radar, soil density scanners, and forensic cadaver dogs trained to detect the faintest traces of human decomposition. 3 days later, the desert property filled with activity once again. The sky burned bright blue overhead as vehicles rolled across the dirt access road. Officers placed new grid markers across the landscape, expanding the search zone beyond the original 30-acre scan. If Harper believed investigators had stopped too soon, they were about to prove him wrong. The cadaver dogs worked first. 2 trained German shepherds moved across the desert slowly, noses low to the ground. Their handlers guided them through the grid lines while investigators watched carefully for any sign of interest. For hours, nothing happened. The dogs moved steadily through dry brush and cracked earth without reacting. The same silence that had dominated the first search returned. Then, just after midday, one of the dogs froze. Its head lifted slightly. The handler tightened the leash. The dog circled once. Then it sat down abruptly. Alert signal. The spot was roughly 60 yards from the location where Emily's shoe had been found. Not far, but far enough to suggest something new. The ground there looked no different from the surrounding desert, flat, dusty, scattered with small stones. But the handler pointed. This dog doesn't sit unless it smells something. Delgado felt the familiar tension again, that quiet moment where possibility hung in the air. Excavation began immediately. This time the team dug deeper. The soil layers revealed subtle disturbances once they reached about 3 feet down. The color of the earth changed slightly, indicating it had been turned long ago. A sign of digging. 4 feet. 5. The hole widened carefully as technicians brushed away loose soil. Then one of them stopped suddenly. Hold on. A shape had appeared beneath the dirt. Not fabric.
Not bone.
Plastic. The team cleared away more soil until the object became visible. A large black garbage bag. Weathered but still intact. Buried deep. Delgado felt his pulse quicken. Evidence bags rarely meant anything good in a desert burial. The technicians cut the plastic carefully, opening it just enough to see what was inside. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the forensic anthropologists exhaled slowly. Clothing. The bag contained several items. A blouse. A pair of jeans. A leather belt. All heavily degraded by time and soil, but recognizable. The clothing matched the outfit Emily Carter had been wearing the night she disappeared. But again, something was missing. No body. No skeletal remains. Just clothing. Buried separately. Delgado stared at the evidence with growing unease. This wasn't a hurried burial. It was deliberate. Methodical. Someone had taken the time to separate items, placing them in different locations across the property.
Why?
Alvarez voiced the question quietly. If he killed her out here, why bury the clothes separately? Delgado didn't answer immediately, because the answer forming in his mind was darker than the question itself. Sometimes killers moved evidence for a reason. To hide it, to destroy it, or to stage the scene in a way that confused investigators. But separating clothing from a body suggested something else. Transport. Movement. Possibly more than one location. And if Emily Carter's remains were never buried on this property at all, the desert might still be holding the rest of the truth somewhere else. Back at the police station, the news of the second discovery reached the prosecutor's office. 2 pieces of Emily's belongings now tied directly to land owned by Michael Harper. The case was no longer just suspicious. It was becoming prosecutable. But the biggest problem remained the same. No body. Without remains, proving homicide in court would be difficult, especially after 17 years. Yet Harper's own words echoed inside Delgado's mind. You should have kept searching. The detectives began reviewing satellite images of the surrounding region. Miles of empty desert stretched in every direction. Dry riverbeds. Abandoned roads. Mining trails rarely used by anyone anymore. If Harper had moved Emily's body after the initial burial, he could have taken it almost anywhere. And the desert was enormous. Still, investigators kept digging. Literally and figuratively. Old phone data was re-examined again using modern mapping tools. The results revealed something investigators in 2003 had missed. 2 nights after Emily Carter disappeared, Harper's phone briefly connected to a cell tower located 30 miles east of his desert property, near a remote canyon road. The connection lasted only a few minutes before the phone signal disappeared again. In 2003, the data had looked meaningless. Now it looked like a possible destination. Delgado circled the area on the map. The location sat near the edge of a narrow canyon known locally as Red Mesa, Washington. Isolated.
Difficult to reach.
And almost completely unmonitored. If someone wanted a place where no one would ever stumble across a grave, it would be a place like that. 2 days later, another convoy of investigators headed into the desert, this time toward the canyon. The road leading to Red Mesa Wash barely qualified as a road anymore, just a faint trail carved by occasional off-road vehicles. The canyon walls rose slowly on either side as the terrain became rougher. It felt like entering another world, a place where time moved slower, a place where secrets could sleep undisturbed for decades. The vehicles stopped near the mouth of the canyon. Wind moved softly through the dry rocks. No buildings, no power lines, nothing but miles of empty land. Delgado stepped out of the vehicle and looked toward the canyon floor stretching ahead. Somewhere in this silence, investigators believed, the rest of Emily Carter's story might still be buried. And if Michael Harper's cryptic warning was true, the desert might be hiding something far more disturbing than anyone had expected. The canyon swallowed sound. When the convoy of vehicles stopped near the entrance to Red Mesa Wash, the sudden silence felt almost unnatural. The engines clicked softly as they cooled under the rising Arizona sun, and beyond that there was nothing but wind moving through dry rock and brittle desert grass. Detective Delgado stepped out first. The canyon stretched ahead in a long, shallow corridor carved by ancient water that no longer flowed here. The ground was uneven, scattered with stones and patches of sand hardened by years of heat. Towering red cliffs rose on either side, cutting off much of the horizon. A place like this could hide almost anything. And for 17 years, no one had looked here. Delgado checked the GPS coordinates again, the location where Michael Harper's phone had briefly connected to a nearby cell tower 2 nights after Emily Carter disappeared. The signal had lasted less than 4 minutes, just long enough to place him in this area. Then the phone went silent again. In 2003, investigators hadn't considered it meaningful. Cell coverage was unreliable across much of rural Arizona, and brief tower pings often appeared randomly in records. But now, standing inside the canyon with the wind brushing against the rock walls, the data felt far less random. Alvarez joined him, studying the landscape. If someone wanted to hide something, she said quietly, this would be a good place. Delgado nodded. Too good. The search teams began working immediately. Cadaver dogs were deployed again, moving slowly across the canyon floor. Their handlers guided them through the rocky terrain while investigators marked possible excavation points with bright orange flags. But searching a canyon was far more difficult than scanning flat desert land. The ground here had been shaped by occasional flash floods. Debris from storms years earlier lay scattered across the floor, branches, rocks, layers of sand that had shifted countless times. Any grave dug here could have been buried beneath multiple new layers of sediment over the years. Still, the search continued. Hour after hour, the dogs moved through the canyon with careful focus, occasionally stopping to sniff deeper into crevices along the rock walls. But no alert came. By early afternoon, frustration began creeping into the operation. Dozens of officers spread across the canyon floor had found nothing but dust and stone. Delgado stood near the center of the wash, staring at the ground. 17 years. If Harper had brought Emily's body here, time and the desert itself might have erased most of the evidence. Animals could scatter remains. Floodwater could shift bones miles downstream. Nature had a way of dissolving crimes. But something about the location still felt important. The phone ping had occurred here. Harper had come here for a reason. Alvarez walked toward him, holding a tablet displaying satellite imagery. Look at this, she said. The image showed the canyon from above, captured by a commercial satellite several years earlier. At first glance, the terrain looked identical everywhere, jagged rock formations and narrow channels carved by rainwater. But Alvarez zoomed in on one small section along the canyon wall. A faint path, barely visible. A narrow trail winding upward toward a shelf carved into the cliffside. Delgado squinted at the screen. That wasn't visible from the ground. No, Alvarez said. But someone drove up there once. Tire tracks. Old ones. Not recent. But the satellite image suggested that at some point in the past, a vehicle had climbed the narrow path toward the rock shelf. And from where Delgado stood, the trail was almost impossible to see, which made it perfect. "Let's take a look," he said. The climb wasn't easy. The trail had partially eroded over the years, forcing the search team to move slowly along the rocky slope. Loose stones slid under their boots as they worked their way toward the shelf visible in the satellite image. By the time they reached the top, the view stretched across miles of open desert. The canyon floor looked distant and quiet below, and the shelf itself was flat, suspiciously flat. Delgado crouched down and ran his hand across the ground. The soil felt different here, looser, as if it had been disturbed long ago and then packed down again. He looked up at Alvarez. "I think we found it." The excavation team was called up immediately. Within minutes, the quiet shelf filled with investigators and equipment. The first shovels cut into the ground carefully, removing layers of dry dirt and stone. Unlike the canyon floor below, this soil clearly showed signs of past disturbance. Someone had dug here before. The question was when, and what they had buried. The hole grew deeper. 1 foot.
2, 3.
The workers switched to hand tools as the soil became denser. Then came the moment every investigator both hoped for and feared. A dull cracking sound. The shovel had struck something hard. Not rock.
Bone.
The excavation stopped immediately. A forensic anthropologist moved forward and brushed away the surrounding dirt with slow, practiced movements. Within minutes, the curved shape of a human rib emerged from the soil. No one spoke. The canyon wind whispered against the cliff walls. More dirt was removed. Another bone appeared. Then another. The remains had been buried carefully, placed inside a shallow grave just beneath the surface of the rock shelf. Time had stripped away clothing and tissue, leaving only the skeleton behind. But even after 17 years, the shape was unmistakable. Human. Small frame. Female. Delgado felt a heavy stillness settle over the team. After nearly 2 decades, Emily Carter had finally been found. The forensic team worked slowly, documenting every detail of the burial site. Each bone was photographed before being removed, placed carefully into evidence containers. Nearby, investigators found another object buried beside the remains. A rusted metal clasp. Part of a necklace. The same necklace Emily's mother had described to police back in 2003. A small silver pendant shaped like a star. The discovery confirmed what everyone already suspected. The body belonged to Emily Carter. But the grave revealed something else as well. The burial had been deliberate.
Neat.
Carefully dug. The work of someone who had taken time to ensure the body would remain hidden. And from the location of the shelf, high above the canyon floor and nearly invisible from below, the killer had chosen well. For 17 years, the grave had remained untouched. Until now. As the sun began dipping toward the western horizon, Delgado stood near the edge of the rock shelf, looking down into the canyon. The desert had kept the secret longer than anyone expected, but it had not kept it forever. Back in Phoenix, the discovery triggered an immediate shift in the investigation. For the first time since Emily Carter disappeared, detectives now had a confirmed homicide victim. The remains would undergo full forensic analysis. Cause of death might still be determined. And if evidence linked the burial site directly to Michael Harper, prosecutors would finally have what they needed. The man who had lived quietly for 17 years. The family friend who had calmly answered questions while hiding the truth. Now the desert had given investigators the final piece. And somewhere inside a jail cell or courtroom in the near future, Michael Harper would soon hear the words he had managed to avoid for nearly 2 decades. Murder. But even as the investigators packed up the excavation site, one quiet detail lingered in Delgado's mind. The grave had been hidden well.
Too well.
Which meant something troubling. Whoever buried Emily Carter here had known the canyon, known the shelf, known exactly where to place a body so it would remain unseen. And that meant the killer hadn't chosen this place randomly. He had planned it. Long before anyone realized Emily Carter had vanished. Night fell over the desert as the last evidence containers were sealed and loaded into the transport vehicles. The canyon returned to silence almost immediately after the investigators left. Wind slid softly across the rock shelf where Emily Carter had lain hidden for 17 years. The shallow grave was now an empty rectangle of disturbed earth, illuminated only by the fading glow of the Arizona sky. For nearly 2 decades, no one had known she was there. No one except the person who put her there. Back in Phoenix, the medical examiner's office worked through the night. Cold cases rarely arrived with intact forensic evidence, but skeletal remains could still speak. Bones held stories that time could not completely erase: fractures, trauma marks, signs of how a life had ended. Emily Carter's remains were laid out carefully under bright laboratory lights. The forensic anthropologist began the slow, methodical process of examination.
Age.
Height. Bone structure. Every measurement aligned with Emily's missing persons records from 2003. But the real question was how she died. Because finding the body transformed the case from suspicion into something much heavier. Proof of homicide. The answer appeared sooner than anyone expected. Near the base of the skull, along the rear of the cranium, the forensic examiner discovered a fracture. Not a natural break caused by time or soil pressure. A blunt force injury. The impact had crushed part of the bone inward.
Severe. Violent.
Almost certainly fatal. The blow had come from behind. That detail changed everything. Emily Carter hadn't died in an accident. She hadn't wandered into the desert and succumbed to exposure. Someone had struck her deliberately. Someone strong enough to deliver a killing blow. Someone standing close behind her. Detective Delgado stared at the X-ray image of the fracture. The shape of the damage suggested something heavy. Possibly a metal object. Maybe a tool. Or even something inside a vehicle. 17 years earlier, investigators might have struggled to connect such evidence to a suspect. But now they had something powerful. A body. A cause of death. And a burial site located near a cell phone signal belonging to Michael Harper. The case that once seemed like a quiet disappearance was now a confirmed murder investigation. And prosecutors were ready to move. The arrest warrant was signed 2 days later. Early morning light had barely touched the streets of Phoenix when police vehicles rolled quietly toward Harper's house. The neighborhood was still asleep. Most homes sat dark and silent as officers stepped out of their cars and approached the front door. Delgado stood at the center of the group, the arrest warrant folded in his hand. 17 years of waiting had led to this moment. He knocked. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Michael Harper stood there wearing a plain gray shirt and jeans, his expression calm, almost tired. He seemed unsurprised to see the officers. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Delgado raised the warrant. "Michael Harper," he said firmly, "you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter." The words hung in the cool morning air. Harper's eyes shifted briefly between the officers. No panic. No anger. Just a long, quiet exhale. "I wondered when you'd get here," he said. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Neighbors would later say they barely noticed the arrest happening. The police vehicles left the street quietly, carrying Harper toward a courtroom where the past would finally collide with the present. Inside the Phoenix courthouse, the news spread quickly. A 17-year-old cold case had finally been solved. Local reporters gathered outside the building as word reached the media. Arizona 2003 cold case solved. Family friend charged after 2 decades. The headline appeared on television screens before noon. But inside the interrogation room, the atmosphere felt far less triumphant. Because Michael Harper still hadn't confessed. He sat across from Delgado and Alvarez again, his hands cuffed to the table. The photographs were laid out in front of him.
The shoe.
The clothing. The skeleton discovered on the canyon shelf. Harper studied them quietly. "You found her," he said. Not a question. A statement. Delgado nodded. "Yes." Harper looked down at the table for a moment. Then he asked something unexpected. Did the desert keep her safe? The question was strange enough that neither detective answered immediately. Finally, Alvarez spoke. She deserved better than that. Harper didn't respond. He simply stared at the photographs again. For a moment, it almost looked like regret flickered across his face. Then it vanished. What happened that night, Michael? Delgado asked. Silence filled the room. The camera in the corner recorded every second. Harper leaned back slightly in his chair. You already think you know, he said. We know she left the grocery store, Delgado replied. We know your truck followed her. We know you drove out to the canyon. Harper's eyes lifted slowly. But you don't know why. The detectives exchanged a glance. Motives often remained the final missing piece in cold case murders. Why had Emily Carter, a 19-year-old college student with no known enemies, been targeted? Why had a trusted family friend suddenly become her killer? Harper seemed to sense the question hanging in the air. He rubbed his hands slowly against the metal cuffs. Then he spoke again. You ever notice how people trust the wrong person? He asked. Delgado said nothing. They invite you into their homes, Harper continued quietly. You sit at their dinner table. You hear their stories. His voice remained calm, but something darker moved beneath it. They think they know who you are. Alvarez leaned forward. And Emily trusted you. Harper's eyes flicked toward her. For the first time since his arrest, a faint smile appeared on his face. Everyone trusted me. The words sent a chill through the room. Because they revealed something investigators had suspected, but never confirmed. Harper had lived inside the Carter family's world. He had known their routines, their schedules, Emily's habits, which meant her disappearance might not have been random at all. It might have been planned. Delgado slid another photograph forward. The canyon grave. You carried her all the way out there, he said. Harper studied the image quietly. The faint smile faded. 17 years, he murmured. The room went still again. Then he looked up at the detectives and asked a question that changed the tone of the entire interrogation. You want to know the worst part? Neither detective answered. Harper leaned forward slightly. The worst part isn't what happened that night. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. The worst part is how easy it was. The sentence hung in the air like a dark shadow. And suddenly the case that had haunted Arizona for nearly 2 decades felt even more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The interrogation room felt colder after those words. The worst part is how easy it was. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The fluorescent light above the metal table hummed softly, the only sound inside the quiet room. Detective Delgado studied Michael Harper's face carefully, searching for signs of deception, hesitation, or regret. There were none. Harper sat still, hands cuffed to the table, his posture relaxed in a way that felt deeply unsettling. 17 years earlier, Emily Carter had trusted him. Now the man who had shared dinners with her family was calmly describing her murder as something simple. Delgado leaned forward slowly. Easy how? Harper looked down at his hands for a moment. You said it yourself, he replied quietly. She trusted me. The detectives exchanged a glance. That word again.
Trust.
In cases like this, trust often became the weapon that made the crime possible. Harper continued speaking without being asked another question. She got in the truck because she thought I was helping her. Alvarez felt her chest tighten. You offered her a ride. Harper shrugged slightly. She didn't want to walk home in the dark. The grocery store parking lot returned in Delgado's mind. The security footage investigators had watched again and again. Emily walking alone toward her car. Harper's pickup truck pulling out minutes later. At the time, it had looked ordinary. 2 people leaving the same parking lot. Now it sounded like the beginning of a trap. What happened after she got in the truck? Delgado asked. Harper leaned back again. She started talking.
About what? School.
Her classes. Some concert she wanted to go to. His voice remained strangely calm, as if he were describing a casual conversation from any ordinary night. But then she realized something. Harper continued. Delgado waited. She realized we weren't going toward her house. Alvarez felt the tension in the room rise. Emily Carter had lived less than 10 minutes from the grocery store. Instead of turning toward her neighborhood, Harper had driven into the open desert. She asked where we were going, Harper said. And you said? Delgado asked. Harper looked up slowly. I said we were taking a shortcut. The lie had worked, at least for a few minutes. The Arizona desert was full of quiet roads that locals used to avoid traffic. Someone unfamiliar with the exact route home might not question a detour immediately. But eventually Emily must have realized something was wrong. Delgado spoke quietly. She tried to get out of the truck. Harper didn't answer, but the silence confirmed it. And that's when you hit her, Alvarez said. The faint smile disappeared from Harper's face. His eyes drifted toward the wall. She started screaming. The words were soft, barely audible. She kept trying to open the door. Delgado felt the weight of the story pressing down on the room. Emily Carter had been trapped inside a moving vehicle with a man she thought was a friend. The realization of danger must have come slowly. Then all at once. What did you hit her with? Delgado asked. Harper rubbed his forehead briefly. There was a tire iron behind the seat. The image formed instantly. A narrow metal tool used to loosen lug nuts. Heavy.
Solid.
Deadly in the wrong hands. I just wanted her to stop screaming, Harper said. The explanation felt hollow. The fracture in Emily's skull had not been a gentle strike meant to quiet someone. It had been powerful, violent, enough to kill her instantly. Harper continued staring at the table. When she stopped moving, I pulled over. The detectives remained silent, letting him speak. The words came easier now, as if 17 years of secrecy had finally loosened something inside him. I checked her pulse, he said. Nothing. Delgado watched carefully. For the first time, Harper's voice carried something faint. Not guilt. Not exactly. But recognition. Recognition that the moment had changed everything. What did you do next? Alvarez asked. Harper exhaled slowly. I drove. Where? To the property. The desert land where investigators had found the shoe and the clothing. You buried her there first, Delgado said. Harper nodded faintly. It seemed like the easiest place. The word again.
Easy.
But the desert property had not been the final location. Investigators already knew that. So, why move the body? Delgado asked. Harper looked up again. And this time his eyes were sharper. Because you came looking. The detectives froze slightly. What do you mean? Alvarez asked. Harper leaned forward. 2 days after she disappeared, I saw police cars driving past the road leading to my land. The initial search for Emily had begun almost immediately in 2003. Volunteers, officers, helicopters scanning the desert. Harper had watched it happen. They weren't searching the property yet, he said. But I knew it was only a matter of time.
Fear.
Not remorse. Fear of being caught. So you went back, Delgado said quietly. Harper nodded. I dug her up that night. The image felt horrifyingly clear. A man returning to a shallow grave under the cover of darkness. Removing the body he had buried days earlier. Why separate the clothing? Alvarez asked. Harper paused. Then shrugged. I thought it would confuse things.
And for 17 years it had.
Investigators had searched for Emily Carter countless times. But without knowing where to look, the desert had swallowed every trace. Then you drove to the canyon, Delgado said.
Harper nodded again.
The rock shelf. The same place investigators had discovered the skeleton. Why there? Alvarez asked. Harper glanced toward the ceiling briefly. My father used to take me hunting there when I was a kid. The answer sent another chill through the room. He had known the location for decades. He had known it was hidden. And he had known no one would stumble across it easily. Delgado studied him closely. You planned that part. Harper didn't deny it. The interrogation room grew quiet again. But one question still lingered. The question that often haunted cases like this long after the killer was identified.
Why?
Delgado finally asked it. Why, Emily? Harper's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a long pause. She reminded me of someone, he said.
Who?
Alvarez asked. Harper didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back at the photograph of the canyon grave. And when he finally spoke, His voice was almost distant. My sister. The detectives exchanged a confused glance. What does that mean? Delgado asked. Harper's eyes drifted somewhere far away. She died when we were kids, he said quietly. Car accident. Silence filled the room. I used to think about what she would have been like if she'd lived, Harper continued. And Emily.
He stopped there.
The sentence remained unfinished, but the implication felt deeply disturbing. Some twisted projection. Some broken idea that had formed slowly over years. Alvarez spoke carefully. So, you killed her because she reminded you of your sister? Harper shook his head faintly.
No.
Another pause. Then he looked directly at them. I killed her because she realized I was lying. The bluntness of the statement hung in the air like a final blow. Not obsession. Not revenge. Just a moment of panic. A decision made in seconds that destroyed a life and left a family searching for answers for nearly 2 decades. Delgado leaned back slowly. The truth had finally surfaced. And it was somehow even darker than the mystery that had surrounded Emily Carter's disappearance for 17 years. The hallway smelled faintly of old paper and cleaning chemicals, the kind of scent that clings to police buildings where decades of cases sit quietly in boxes, waiting for someone to remember them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the detective pushed open the cold case archive door. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the dimness, each stacked with files. Thousands of stories paused mid-sentence. Somewhere in that room was the file that had haunted a family for nearly 20 years. The folder was thick, its edges worn, the label fading but still readable. Arizona, 2003. Missing person/possible homicide. Inside were photographs that had once shaken a quiet neighborhood to its core. A small suburban house. A quiet cul-de-sac. Yellow police tape fluttering in the desert wind. And the face of a young woman whose disappearance had once dominated local headlines before slowly dissolving into silence. She had vanished in the middle of an ordinary night. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. No clear suspects. Just a cold case that refused to die. But on that morning in the archive room, something had changed. Because investigators were no longer looking at the file as a mystery. They were looking at it as a solved crime. And the man responsible had been sitting just outside the story for 20 years. In the spring of 2003, the neighborhood where the young woman lived had the kind of calm people moved to Arizona for. Palm trees lined the streets. Kids rode bikes until sunset. Neighbors waved as they pulled into driveways after work. It was the kind of place where people left garage doors open and trusted the faces they saw every day, which made the disappearance feel impossible. The victim, 22 years old, had been home alone that night. Her parents were out of town visiting relatives. She had spoken to a friend on the phone shortly before midnight. Everything about the conversation sounded normal. She talked about work, weekend plans, a movie she wanted to see. Then she said goodnight. The line went quiet. And sometime after that moment, the story took a turn no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. The next morning, a neighbor noticed something strange. The front door of the house was slightly open. At first it seemed like nothing. Maybe someone had stepped outside for a moment. Maybe someone had forgotten to close it. But hours passed. The door never moved. And the car in the driveway never left. By the afternoon, concern had turned into fear. The police were called. Officers arrived expecting something routine. A welfare check. A quick conversation. Maybe a misunderstanding. Instead, they stepped into a house that felt wrong the moment they crossed the threshold. The living room was quiet. Too quiet. The television was off. The kitchen light was still on. And the young woman was nowhere in sight. Her phone was inside the house. Her purse sat on the counter. Her shoes were by the door. It was as if she had simply disappeared. Detectives searched the house for hours. Closets. Bathrooms. Backyard. Garage. No signs of forced entry. No shattered windows. No obvious evidence of a struggle. Just an absence that grew heavier the longer investigators stayed. Outside, patrol cars lined the street. Neighbors gathered in small, nervous groups. Whispers moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Did she run away? Was someone inside the house? Did someone take her? The questions spread faster than the facts. And within hours, local news stations arrived. The words, "missing woman," flashed across television screens throughout the city. But as the investigation deepened, detectives began to realize something unsettling. This wasn't just a missing person case. Something darker had happened inside that house. One detail bothered investigators more than anything else: the back gate. It was open. The yard was surrounded by a tall wooden fence designed for privacy and security. Normally, the gate remained locked, but that morning it swung slightly in the breeze. When officers examined the ground nearby, they noticed something subtle: disturbed dirt. Not deep footprints, just the faint suggestion that someone had moved quickly through the area. The desert climate made evidence difficult to preserve. Wind erased impressions quickly. Heat baked the soil into hard, stubborn ground. Still, the investigators photographed everything. They collected soil samples. They examined the fence for fibers. But the scene yielded almost nothing. It was as if whoever had entered the property knew exactly how to leave without a trace. In the days that followed, the investigation exploded across the community. Search teams combed nearby desert areas. Volunteers distributed missing person flyers at gas stations and grocery stores. Helicopters scanned empty stretches of land outside the city. Friends and family gave emotional interviews on television, pleading for information. But one detail began to draw quiet attention from detectives. Someone had visited the house shortly before the disappearance. Not a stranger. Someone the family knew. Someone the young woman trusted. A family friend who had stopped by earlier that evening. At first, it didn't seem suspicious. He had known the family for years. Attended barbecues. Helped with home repairs. The kind of familiar face no one questioned. When detectives first spoke to him, his explanation sounded simple. He said he had stopped by briefly.
Dropped off a tool he had borrowed. Talked for a few minutes.
Then left. He claimed the young woman was completely fine when he walked away. Relaxed. Smiling.
Alive.
At the time, investigators had no reason to doubt him. He wasn't the only person they interviewed. Dozens of friends, co-workers, neighbors, former classmates, anyone who might know something. But the trail kept collapsing. No financial activity. No phone calls after midnight. No confirmed sightings. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The investigation slowed. The news coverage faded. And the file slowly moved toward the place every detective dreads: the cold case shelf. For the family, time didn't move the same way. Every year felt like a loop. Birthdays without her. Holidays without her chair at the table. The unanswered question that followed them everywhere: what happened that night? Where did she go? And who was responsible? Over the years, investigators occasionally reopened the case. New tips surfaced. Most went nowhere. Technology improved. DNA testing became more advanced. But without physical evidence, the case remained stubbornly frozen in time. The family friend who had visited that night continued living his life. Working. Attending community events. Seeing the victim's relatives occasionally at gatherings. Each time offering the same quiet sympathy. Each time repeating the same story. He had stopped by. Talked briefly. Left. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. For 2 decades, that version of events remained untouched. Until something changed. In 2022, the Cold Case Unit of the Arizona Police Department began reviewing unsolved disappearances from the early 2000s. The department had recently received funding for a specialized team focused entirely on long-dormant investigations. Detectives who worked in the unit were patient, methodical, obsessed with details that others might overlook. They reopened old files, not expecting miracles. But sometimes miracles happened. When the 2003 disappearance landed on one detective's desk, he noticed something that earlier investigators had missed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. Just a tiny inconsistency buried in the timeline. The family friend had said he left the house shortly after 9:30 p.m. But a neighbor's statement from the original investigation mentioned seeing a pickup truck parked near the house closer to 11 o'clock. At the time, the discrepancy had seemed minor. Memories fade. Witnesses confuse times. But the detective kept reading. And the more he studied the file, the more the timeline started to wobble. Phone records, vehicle sightings, witness recollections. Individually, each piece meant almost nothing. Together, they started forming a shadow, a shape, a possibility investigators had never fully explored. For the first time in 20 years, the cold case began to warm. The detective called the family friend in for another interview. By then, 2 decades had passed. People change over that kind of time. Memories fade. Confidence shifts. And sometimes, stories that once sounded convincing begin to crack. The man agreed to come in. He walked into the station calmly, friendly, relaxed, the same way he had 2 decades earlier. At first, the conversation felt routine. Detectives asked about the night in 2003. He repeated the familiar story. Stopped by. Spoke briefly. Left around 9:30. Nothing unusual. But then investigators started asking about the timeline. The pickup truck. The neighbor's statement. The possibility that he had stayed longer than he originally claimed. For the first time in the interview, the man hesitated. Just for a moment. But detectives noticed. Because in cold cases, small moments matter. And sometimes, a single pause can echo louder than a confession. The detective leaned forward across the table, his voice calm but precise. And as the silence stretched between them, the case that had slept for 2 decades began to shift again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to suggest that the truth, the one buried since 2003, was finally starting to rise to the surface. The interview room felt smaller the longer the silence lasted. 2 detectives sat across from the man who had once been welcomed into the victim's home like family. The same man who had stood beside her parents at backyard barbecues. The same man who had told investigators, for nearly 20 years, that he had left the house before anything strange happened. Now the air between them had changed. It carried the weight of something unfinished. The lead detective slid a photograph across the table. A grainy image printed from an old evidence scan. A pickup truck, parked near the curb on the night of the disappearance. The timestamp glowed faintly at the bottom of the photo. 10:57 p.m. Nearly 90 minutes later than the time the man had sworn he left. The family friend looked down at the picture. His eyes lingered on it longer than expected. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "Could be anyone's truck," he said quietly. But the detective didn't respond. Instead, he opened the thick folder sitting beside him. Inside were documents investigators had spent months quietly assembling. Records. Statements. Fragments of a story that had begun to look very different than the one the man had told. Because the more the cold case unit examined the old evidence, the more the timeline began to unravel. And the man sitting in that chair was slowly becoming the center of it. The first break came from technology that didn't exist in 2003.
Digital mapping.
Enhanced record analysis. Reconstructed timelines built from old phone data and archived service logs. Back then, cell phone towers had recorded basic connection information. It wasn't precise enough to track movements minute by minute. But 20 years later, analysts could reconstruct patterns that once seemed invisible. When detectives examined the family friend's phone records from that night, something unusual emerged. His phone had connected to a tower near the victim's house much later than he had claimed to be there. Closer to midnight. The same window of time when the young woman had vanished. Investigators double-checked the data. Then they checked it again. Each time the results stayed the same. He had not left at 9:30. He had stayed. And the longer detectives studied the file, the clearer the pattern became. The man had been the last known person to see her alive. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Cold cases collapse when investigators rush. So the team kept digging. They re-interviewed neighbors who still lived in the area. Most remembered very little. 2 decades changes memory the way desert wind changes landscapes. But one witness remembered something that had never seemed important at the time.
A sound.
Late that night. Not a scream. Not a fight. Just the sharp slam of a truck door sometime close to midnight. At the time, the witness had assumed someone was leaving a party nearby. But the sound came from the direction of the victim's house. And now, years later, that small memory began to feel heavier. Because the pickup truck in the photograph matched the one the family friend had driven in 2003. The investigators turned their attention to the truck itself. It had long since been sold, passed between owners, driven thousands of miles across Arizona. But vehicles leave records, registration documents, insurance claims, maintenance receipts. Eventually, detectives located the man who had purchased the truck years after the disappearance.
He still had it.
Parked behind a small workshop outside the city. The detectives arrived early in the morning. The truck looked different now. Faded paint, dust along the edges of the windows. But the structure was the same. The same frame, the same bed, the same interior where a crime might once have happened. Forensic technicians began their examination slowly, methodically. They removed sections of carpet from inside the cab, swabbed surfaces that hadn't been touched in years, checked seams in the upholstery, collected samples from the truck bed. Most of it felt like routine. Evidence that had sat exposed to heat and sunlight for decades rarely survives. But the team wasn't looking for obvious traces. They were looking for anything, even microscopic fragments, anything that might still be waiting. Weeks passed before the lab results came back. When the call finally arrived, the detective listened without interrupting. Then he slowly lowered the phone. Inside the truck, hidden beneath layers of worn carpet fibers, forensic analysts had discovered something. A trace.
Not visible to the eye,
but unmistakable once the tests were complete. Biological material.
old,
Degraded, but still capable of speaking. The DNA profile matched the missing woman. After 20 years, the first physical evidence had finally surfaced. And it had surfaced inside the truck belonging to the man who claimed he left her house hours earlier. When detectives brought the family friend in again, the tone of the room was very different. The same table, the same chairs. But the file between them was thicker now. He sat down slowly, his expression tighter than before. Detectives didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. Cold case investigators know patience is more powerful than pressure. The lead detective opened the folder and placed a single document on the table. A lab report. The man glanced at it. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. For the first time since the interview began, his breathing changed. The detective spoke quietly. "The evidence places her inside your truck." The words hung in the room like smoke. For a long time, the man didn't answer. He stared at the paper, then at the detectives, then back at the paper again. Outside the interview room, officers watched through the glass. Every movement mattered now. Every shift of the man's posture. Every flicker in his expression. Because cold cases often break in moments like this. Not with dramatic confessions, but with slow collapses. Stories that weaken under the weight of facts. The man finally spoke. His voice sounded different than before. Lower, less certain. He said he didn't know how the DNA got there. He suggested maybe she had borrowed something from the truck once. Maybe years earlier. Maybe during a family gathering. But the explanation didn't match the evidence. Forensic analysts had found the material deep in the truck's interior, in places casual contact could never reach. The detective leaned forward slightly. And then he said something that shifted the entire conversation. "We also know you stayed at the house until nearly midnight." The man's face tightened. Investigators continued calmly. They described the phone tower data, the neighbor's statement, the truck sighting. Piece by piece, they dismantled the story he had told for 20 years. By the time the detective finished speaking, the room had gone completely silent. The man's hands rested flat on the table. Still, unmoving. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. Not enough to look like surrender, but enough for the detectives to recognize what was happening. The wall he had built around the story was beginning to crack. But even then, the truth did not come all at once. Instead, the man tried to reshape the narrative. He admitted he had stayed later than he originally said. He claimed they had argued. Nothing serious, just a disagreement. He insisted she was alive when he left. But every new statement created new problems, new inconsistencies, new questions. The detectives listened carefully. Let him talk. Because sometimes people reveal more when they try to defend themselves than when they confess. By the time the interview ended, the man's version of events had changed 3 times. And each version moved him closer to the center of the crime. Outside the station, detectives gathered quietly. The evidence had reached a point where the case could no longer remain open-ended. The timeline, the truck, the DNA, the shifting story. After 20 years, the investigation finally had something it had always lacked: direction. And a suspect whose explanations were collapsing under scrutiny. The file that had once gathered dust on a cold case shelf was now sitting on a prosecutor's desk. For the first time since 2003, the possibility of an arrest was real. But the story wasn't finished yet, because one final piece of the mystery still remained unsolved. The most painful question of all: what exactly had happened inside that quiet house the night the young woman vanished? And where had her body gone? The answer to those questions was still locked somewhere inside the mind of the man who had just walked out of the interview room. And detectives were determined to unlock it, no matter how long it took.